DW Africa Link.
Imagine this. Vast stretches of land once used by local communities for farming and grazing, suddenly off limits. Promises of climate action, billions of dollars flowing in, but the people on the ground, they are left out of the conversation. This is the reality of carbon offset projects in Kenya. And many Kenyans are saying enough is enough. That's what's coming up. Stay tuned. My name is Josey Mahachi. Welcome to Africa Link, the podcast that connects you to the stories that matter from Africa.
Africa Link, every weekday here on DW.
A Kenyan court has ruled against a major carbon offset project used by Meta, Netflix, and British Airways, dealing a blow to the controversial initiative long opposed by Indigenous activists. The case, brought by 165 affected community members, challenged two major conservancies run by the Northern Rangelands Trust, NRT. The court found they were unconstitutionally established and ordered the removal of NRT's heavily armed rangers accused of human rights abuses. Carbon offset projects are marketed as climate solutions, but in Kenya, they have fueled land disputes, evictions, and claims of carbon colonialism. So what does this landmark ruling mean for both opponents and supporters of these projects? Joining me to discuss this are Dr. Mordecai Ogada, a Kenyan ecologist and conservation policy expert, and Daniel Plafker, a DW journalist based in Kenya. We'll start with you, Daniel. If you can just give us an overview of what exactly is happening on ground. Tell us more about this case and the highlights of what the court ruled on.
Thanks so much for having us on the program today. Friday, January 24th, marked a landmark ruling, a landmark outcome in a court case that has been making its way through Kenya's judicial system for more than 3 years. It featured 165, mainly Borana pastoralists from the country's Isiolo County, filing a constitutional petition against the Northern Rangelands Trust, which is one of Kenya's and indeed East Africa's most influential conservation organizations. It's an organization that has established conservancies on vast swaths of northern Kenya's semi-arid grasslands and savanna. In this case, they were alleging that the conservancies this organization had established were set up without consent of Indigenous residents, and that the armed rangers that the organization was using to patrol the conservation land that they've set up were operating illegally and outside of the bounds of government regulations. So this was a landmark ruling because while it's not the first time that residents of community land under Northern Rangelands Trust control sued the organization, it is the first time that a case of this kind has gone to judgment. And the judgment has been far-reaching indeed, with big implications for all kinds of economic and environmental activity that's taking place on this land, not least of which includes the Northern Kenya Rangelands Carbon Project, which is the largest soil carbon project of its kind anywhere in Africa, and as the organization claims, anywhere in the world. So a very significant ruling for those reasons, Josey.
All right. How have obviously Kenyans reacted to this ruling? Because obviously they say they're not being carried along. They don't know what is happening, but money is changing hands. What's been the reaction like on ground, Daniel?
Yeah, money certainly is changing hands, Josey, and in very large quantities at that. This project, just to maybe back up and introduce the context for it, this project is called the Northern Kenya Rangelands Carbon Project, and it's been active in one way or another since as early as 2012. And it covers an enormous area. We're talking about something close to 1.9 million hectares of Kenyan land. That's an area roughly the size of the country of Slovenia, a little smaller than Rwanda or Burundi, for example. And the way it works is, like all carbon projects, it provides an opportunity for companies anywhere in the world who may want to reduce their net carbon emissions, but perhaps don't want to make significant operational changes in order to do so. It lets them outsource their CO2 reductions to other people. In this case, economically marginalized peasants of northern Kenya who have for centuries made use of this community land to raise their animals. It's an area of the country dominated by pastoralism, which means people there make a living in large part by raising herd animals like goats, sheep, cattle, and camels for meat, milk, and other products. In this case, the way that the Carbon Project has been claiming to sequester carbon from the atmosphere is by making arrangements to reduce the grazing on certain patches of community land. In other words, they say that by avoiding what they call overgrazing of certain swaths of grassland, they can allow the plants that grow on that land to mature, allow the roots to deepen, and thereby bind CO2 from the atmosphere to the soil. So by avoiding that grazing, they're able to generate carbon credits, carbon offset credits, which can then be sold all over the world to some very large companies indeed, including some of the most well-known tech companies in the United States, like Netflix or Meta, the company that owns Facebook, and some very big companies in Germany as well, including the Hamburg-based Bayersdorf Group, which owns the Nivea line of skincare products and cosmetics.
Right. So thank you so much, Daniel, actually, for giving us that overview for people like me who's not from Kenya, or our listeners also who might not understand exactly what a carbon offset project is. I mean, this has been quite a detailed brief, but now to come to you, Dr. Ogada, as an expert, can you just give us your reaction to the court's ruling? Was the ruling what you anticipated?
Okay, thank you for having me. The ruling was, well, personally, I was very surprised and pleasantly surprised by the ruling. And why I was surprised is because the carbon offset business, and it's a business, it's nothing to do with the environmental, has managed to co-opt, because of the large amounts of money that Daniel alluded to changing hands. They've co-opted all sorts of people, from communities to government to local legislators to international organizations. They've sort of co-opted everyone into their bandwagon. It was no small surprise to me that this court sort of ruled against them, because everything thus far, and in my personal experience, we've been speaking up against this annexation of land for over a decade now, and we've never managed to get any traction with official authorities.
What's been the hurdle, Mordecai, this is a long time that you've been, like you're saying, that the country has been trying to have this discussion. What's been the hurdle?
Corruption, in a word.
Right.
The fact that there's just so much money. People, community members get paid off, legislators get paid off, local administrators get paid off, security organs get paid off, and things just go on unabated. So this court has actually given a ruling against an injustice that has gone on for a long time and over a much wider area than the particular areas involved in the case.
And if you look at the ruling in your own opinion, Dr. Ogada, what could be the implications of this ruling, focusing or maybe looking largely at the environment and such carbon offset projects? And now, we don't want to really just talk about Kenya. This could be happening in other African countries, just for people to understand the implications.
The implications of this ruling is that it removes the legality from the financial maneuvering that is carbon credits, and for this case, it will remove the legality, and so that the big financial players suddenly will not be able to claim officially or at official fora or with their government that they are doing something legal to reduce their carbon footprint. So, and the second thing is that it will remove the legal basis for funding from governmental sources. Because there's a lot of funding for these programs from governmental sources. By those I mean like USAID or BIFID or Danida from Denmark. and the AFD from France and other governmental sources. So those ones will be curtailed as well. And then the most important thing, I think, it has exposed the fact that this whole carbon credits and carbon sequestration business, very free, fast and loose. It's not regulated. No one really knows what's going on at this, and it covers up a lot of injustice on the ground.
Right, right. And for you, Daniel, how did both parties to this case react to the ruling? We're talking of the people who are benefiting, as Dr. Ogada has just said. Now there's a lot of corruption, and also the other side.
It's a great question, Josey. Obviously, for the 165 petitioners from Isiolo County who brought this case, the reaction has been nothing short but ecstatic. We spoke to one petitioner who told us outside the courthouse on the 24th of Jan that happy could not even begin to describe how he feels after facing all of the obstacles that Dr. Ogada has described, that Indigenous residents of this land have been trying to overcome in their years-long struggle to see their community land rights recognized under Kenya's constitution, and to see what they consider to be their fair share of the benefits accruing from the sale of their natural resources coming their way. I mean, let's remember that carbon credits, soil carbon, is very much just that. It is a natural resource. And there are people here in East Africa describing the scramble for land to produce these carbon credits as a second scramble for Africa's natural resources. And that's a very old story that we here on the continent are familiar with and have been seeing playing out over the decades and indeed the centuries. Let's remember that in order to generate these offsets, these land-based, nature-based solutions do require a large amount of land. So it's very logical for those who are participating in this economy, in this marketplace, to seek out the cheapest and easiest ways to get the land to produce the commodity that they want, in this case, carbon offsets. And it just so happens that this part of Kenya is among the country's most economically marginalized and indeed politically marginalized regions, and has been since as early as independence, or even indeed beyond. So it's no small significance that a three-judge bench, rather, from Kenya's High Court has ruled in such an extensive and uncompromising manner against one of the country's most powerful and influential conservation bodies. They've said that these conservancies were established on Indigenous peoples' lands.
Dr. Ogada, would you want to add something to that, or maybe answer to some of the questions that Daniel also even put across, as someone who's in this field and you've been focusing mainly on the conservation policy?
Thank you, Josey. I think it's also important for your listeners to understand that carbon credits, there is no correct or proper way of doing carbon credits, because the business of carbon credits, by definition, is corrupt. And this is what I mean. There is no way someone can mess up a river in Germany, for instance, and compensate for that by planting trees in Kenya. Mm-hmm. Environment doesn't work like that. And you see what Daniel referred to as they are trying to limiting grazing on certain lands. Now, one who understands the pastoralist identity and economy will understand that the glue that holds pastoralists to their land is the livestock. Mm-hmm. Once you remove livestock from the land, you've effectively displaced the people. So the areas from which they are being prevented from grazing, they're effectively being displaced from those areas. And why they're being displaced is because there are two currencies in carbon credit trading. There is finance, there is dollars, and the other currency is land. They report on carbon credits per unit area of land. So they need to keep grabbing more and more land. And that's why this case really happened. Before they started out and they were doing very carefully, doing public participation, telling all the lies they need to tell, bribing all the people they need to bribe, and getting everything set up in a row, even which is done corruptly. But their demand for dollars led to demand for more and more land. So they started doing it in a hurry without public participation. And that's what led to this case. So they basically collapsed because of their own carelessness or arrogance. But again, it's important that we know that carbon trading, as long as carbon trading goes on, the big polluters in the world will not reduce their emissions. They will just pay money to somebody somewhere to displace some people somewhere. And that's what drives the injustice. At the end of the day, the emissions from Meta, Netflix, all these other people are still the same. It's just that some people are being displaced from their land in Samburu.
Yeah, Dr. Ogada, some people might also say or assume that, okay, maybe because the money didn't reach their own pockets or their own hands, that's why these indigenous people are protesting these projects. Would you say their concerns are legitimate or otherwise?
You know, with finance flows, there's sale of goods and you pay for goods or services. And you have definite price for amount of, if you, let's say you're buying a ton of sugar, which costs X amount and you pay for that. With carbon credit, it's intangible. Who knows how many tons? The same people who trade in these things are the ones who do the audit inputs of carbon on a given place. And they're the ones who determine the prices. So we are basically trading real money for something that doesn't exist. And that's what makes it difficult for people to be paid, because how much are you going to pay these people? And the people who benefit from carbon credits are these brokers. That's why it's never done directly. That's why Netflix can never go to a Samburu village and tell him, I'm going to pay you $50,000 for the carbon credits on your area of land. That's why there's the brokers in between. So it's by definition a crooked business. Nobody gets paid. And even the ones who go to court, if you go around and look, one of the most telling things even for journalists like Daniel and others is to go on the ground and find someone who has said, who can tell you, I was paid $5,000 for this, or I was paid $100 for this. I've still not found a single person who could show me the money he was given or she was given for the carbon credit sequestered on their land. It's always through third and fourth and fifth parties. And through every party, the money reduces and reduces until the locals get paid a pittance and the millions that Meta or whoever else is paying go into the hands of brokers.
Right. Now, Daniel, Dr. Ogada has explained that no money is really paid. It's never clear. Now, do we know what will happen next following this ruling?
Well, on the question of payments, Josey, I think it is absolutely true, as Dr. Ogada has pointed out, that the very nature of the ways these markets operate and the way that the money changes hands from the end user, there are so many people who take a portion of this money before it reaches the producer of the credits. In the case of the Northern Rangelands Carbon Project, the money that's paid is held in a fund managed by the same organization that Kenya's High Court has just found liable for violating constitutional statutes in establishing the conservancies where these carbon credits are generated. And in our own reporting in the area, no, we did not find any single individual who received cash disbursement as a result of the sale of the credits generated on their land. Instead, the carbon project's proponent, the Northern Rangelands Trust, will tell you things like, well, we use the money to build wells for the community, or we put it in a special kitty to help them supplement food in times of drought. But never will you see an example of an individual herder or household being given a cash payment for the credits produced on land that the Kenyan constitution says is theirs. And I think that's the fundamental injustice of how this commodity is being produced and sold around the world. In terms of what happens next for this lawsuit, it was the first of its kind. There's never been a precedent before in Kenya where a case of this kind has gone to judgment. Has great significance for that reason. Of course, the organization marketing these carbon credits, the Northern Rangelands Trust, is not letting this go without a fight. They've indicated an intention to appeal this case to an even higher court.
Right. Now, as we wrap up our discussion with you, Dr. Ogada, just looking at other African countries and even the region, why should conservancies or such natural environments be protected from such projects?
The custodians of these lands, the pastoralists, are probably the most environmentally astute, and that's why their land still hosts so much wildlife and natural environment. Their footprint is very light. And the other thing is that the cause of environmentalism has become a huge blind spot for humanity. Commerce cannot violate human rights routinely. Agriculture can't violate human rights routinely, and all these other fields. But conservation can, because we have this mantra, each for the planet. I'm killing people to save the planet. I'm displacing people to save the planet. And this is a grave philosophical danger to mankind in two ways. Because firstly, because it violates the rights of people, and secondly, because it distracts from the key problem, which is emissions. And I like to repeat as a take-home message. Carbon trading anywhere in the world has 0.0 effect on the emissions that are destroying our environment. So it's important for your listeners to understand this. And now that we have this ruling, it's a great precedent in that it will cut off a lot of the sources of funding, because the projects Daniel referred to, like we are digging a borehole for them and this kind of thing, that's the myth they use. Those projects that they do for their communities are actually donor-funded projects. That's where the money from USAID and other things go. It's not carbon money. The carbon money ends up in pockets and these kitties and funds that Daniel referred to, whereby the owners of the land actually have to apply, write a proposal to get money that is supposedly theirs already. So there's a lot of injustice, but this has put an important precedent in place that we can refer to, and it's sort of by coincidence also coincided with the new U.S. president's decision to end the blanket foreign aid and money that's given to all these other countries. That's probably why they haven't appealed, because they don't see where funds is going to come from for them to continue with these other boreholes and these other things. Because they were, if they were just using the carbon money, it can continue even without a conservancy. Mm-hmm. You can give Mordecai money without having a conservancy. But it's USAID or GIZ or whoever it is, and that's where their problem lies. So we are in a good place philosophically now, and we hope for the best.
Dr. Mordecai Ogada, a Kenyan ecologist and conservation policy expert, and Daniel Plafker, a DW journalist based in Kenya. Many thanks for joining us.
Get the stories that are shaping the continent here on Africa Link.
The Northern Kenya Rangelands Carbon Project, NKRCP, is the world's largest soil carbon removal project. The anticipated aim is to restore lands through the carbon market, removing 50 million tons of CO2 over 30 years and generate hundreds of millions of dollars for local communities. A couple of months ago, DW premiered an investigative documentary that revealed that local rangeland coordinators are key to such a project. Despite the ongoing controversy about such projects, rangeland coordinators say there are many benefits for communities covered by it. Let's hear from one of them, Francis Bahati from the Melako Conservancy, who spoke to DW's Planet A investigators.
We are participating in Northern Rangelands Carbon Project as a conservancy, and the type of carbon, we call it soil carbon. By using rotational or grazing, that coordinated grazing, that grass also stored CO2 from the atmosphere, and is also a source of revenue for the community. We go to them and tell, this is the right time now we start to think about grazing planning. Where do you want us to take our livestock? They discuss and agree, and they give us a list. So the Conservancy now supports. We are not restricting livestock. We try to support the elders to do traditional grazing, but in a modern way, or in a way that is sustainable for them.
Well, that's it for this edition of Africa Link. Remember, you are not just a listener, but also a part of our community, and your engagement can shape the direction of our discussions. Please remember to follow so you can catch all of the Africa Link podcast episodes. This podcast was co-produced and edited by Isaac Kalechi. My name is Josey Mahachi. Thanks for listening. Until the next one, it's bye for now.
DW News.
Here are today's top news stories and why they matter. Message of condolences and tributes have been pouring in after the death of Namibia's founding president, Sam Nujoma. He died in the country's capital, Windhoek, over the weekend. The African Union Commission chairperson, Musa Faki Mahamat, paid tribute to Nujoma, describing him as the epitome of courage, never wavering from his vision for a free Namibia and a unified Africa. So why such kind words